Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Eternal Life Plan. You know me, I'm Christine Harrington. Tonight, we have a critical conversation ahead of us. My guest is Mike Lewis, a founder of Where Peter Is, and we're going to discuss an article he wrote that has generated significant attention and, frankly, significant controversy. It's titled Straight Answers, The Reasons Behind Restricting the Latin Mass. Now, before we bring on Mike, I want to set the stage for what we're about to discuss because this conversation matters deeply for the future of the church. For years now, we've watched a growing divide in the church. On one side, we have those attached to the traditional Latin Mass, who feel that something precious is being taken from them. On the other side, you have church leadership, including Pope Francis and now Pope Leo XIV, implementing restrictions that many traditionalists view as punitive, unnecessary, and over-dramatizing that it's cruel. The usual narrative from the traditionalist perspective goes something like this. We just want to worship as our ancestors did. We're being persecuted for being faithful Catholics. There's no real problem here, just hostility from modernists in Rome who hate reverence and tradition. The traditionalists believe if you're not on their side, well, you're a modernist. Is that true? No, it's not. I am a conservative Catholic, and I support both masses. But tonight, we're going to hear a different perspective, not because it's more comfortable, but because if we're serious about understanding what's happening in our church, we need to grapple with what church leadership is actually thinking, not what we assume they're thinking. Remember, I always say, seek to understand, not to criticize. So we're not talking about a caricature, but what bishops, Vatican officials, and the popes themselves are actually concerned about. Mike Lewis has spent years talking to church insiders, bishops, Vatican officials, theologians, priests. His article lays out in unusually blunt terms what these leaders are seeing and why they believe restrictions on the TLM are necessary. And I'll be honest with you, some of what you're going to hear will sting. Mike himself acknowledges this in his article. But here's what I want you to understand as we begin. This isn't about attacking anyone's sincerity. This is not about denying that people have profound spiritual experiences at the TLM Mass. Because people have profound spiritual experiences at the Novus Ordo Mass too. This is not about diminishing the young families or priestly vocations that have emerged from the TLM communities, because young families and priestly vocations have also emerged in the Novus Ordo Mass as well. Mike makes this crystal clear. Church leadership concerns are not about the beauty of the old liturgy. They're not about reverence. They're not about Latin. They're not even primarily about a few bad apples or fringe extremists. So what are they about? According to Mike's conversations with church leadership, the restrictions are about one thing: the restoration of unity in the Catholic Church. Church leaders believe, rightly or wrongly, which we'll explore this tonight, that the traditional movement has become functionally a movement of resistance to the postconciliar church. Not just criticism, not just preference for an older form, but fundamental rejection of papal authority, rejection of Vatican II, and rejection of the ordinary magisterium of recent popes. Mike provides a lengthy, detailed list of specific concerns that bishops and Vatican officials are observing daily. Let me give you a few examples. Calling the Pope a heretic, or routinely claiming his teachings contradict the Catholic faith. I've seen this all over social media daily. Rejecting official church teachings like the revision to the Catechism on the death penalty, or documents like Amoris Laetitia and Fiducia Supplicans. Treating excommunicated Archbishop Vigano or Bishop Strickland as martyrs for defying papal authority. Signing petitions accusing the Pope of heresy, claiming that Vatican II can be essentially ignored because it was just pastoral. Referring to the post-conciliar church as a different religion, a Novus Ordoism, promoting conspiracy theories about Masonic or Jewish infiltration into the church. Now, before you react, and I know many of you are already reacting, Mike's argument is not that every person who attends a Latin Mass believes all of these things. His argument is that these positions are not fringe. They are promoted by nearly every major public voice in the traditionalist movement. They shape communities. They form the next generation. And here's the part that I think will be most challenging for many viewers. Mike argues that church leadership has concluded that generous accommodations has failed. In 2007, with Pope Benedict's Summarium Pontificum, it was meant to foster reconciliation. It gave unprecedented permission for the old Mass, The hope was that this would bring traditionalists back into full communion with the church and that it would heal old wounds. But from the leadership's perspective, the opposite happened. The movement didn't become more integrated, it became more separate, more ideological, more convinced that it represents true Catholicism while the rest of the church has just lost its way. The public voices didn't become moderate, they became extreme. And so church leadership made a calculation. They looked at this tiny minority within the church, and traditionalists are a tiny minority. And I have done videos about this. Less than 2% of all Catholics that attend Mass in the United States, less than 2% attend a TLM Mass. They're virtually non-existent in most of the world. In most of the world, you don't hear these arguments. It's mostly in the United States. And they asked, can this be sustained indefinitely? Can we have two groups within one church, one that accepts Vatican II and papal authority, and one that fundamentally rejects both, and just pretend this is sustainable? Their answer was no. Pope Leo himself, in a recent interview, said something striking. He said, the liturgy has become a political tool, and he's exactly right. He said that when people refuse to dialogue with their bishops, when they won't accept reasonable accommodations like a reverent Latin Novus Ordo, we're into ideologue now. We're no longer into the experience of church communion. That phrase that Pope Leo said, quote, we're no longer into the experience of church communion, end quote, that's the heart of this. Church leadership believes that for many in the traditional movement, this is not about liturgical preference. It's about opposition to the church as it exists today. Now, I know some of you are thinking, this is scapegoating. We're a tiny minority. Although rarely do they ever admit that they're a tiny minority. Why focus on us when there are progressive dissenters causing problems too? Why are we being singled out? Mike addresses this. The difference from church leadership's perspective is this. Progressive dissenters typically aren't building separate communities with separate identities, raising their children to view the institutional church as corrupt and gathering around a distinct liturgical practice that symbolizes their opposition. The traditional movement, however, is doing all of those things. And that leads to the question that haunts this entire discussion. Where does this end? Mike frames it starkly. There are only two possible outcomes: unity or schism. The current situation cannot continue indefinitely. Tonight, we're going to explore all of this with Mike Lewis. We're going to push back. We're going to ask the hard questions. Is this characterization fair? Is church leadership overreacting? What about pastoral sensitivity? What about the families who genuinely just want a reverent worship? And there are those in the TLM movement that I have personally heard from that don't want to be lumped into this group of toxic traditionalists. They just want to go to Mass and live their lives. What's the path forward? but we're also going to take seriously the perspective that Mike is presenting. Because whether you agree with it or not, this is what church leadership believes. This is what's driving their decisions. And if traditionalists don't understand this, if they keep dismissing it as hatred or persecution or conspiracy, if they keep spinning, then they're not actually engaging with the reality of their situation, and they're harming other traditional Catholics. Mike ends this article with a direct question to traditionalists. Our Catholic faith teaches us that the visible source of unity in the church is the successor of Peter, the Pope. Traditionalists, can you honestly say you hold to that doctrine? Good question. That's the question at the heart of everything we're about to discuss. So let's begin. Please welcome Mike Lewis, who is the founder of Where is Peter? Thank you, Michael, for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Oh, wow. Where Peter is, you told me to correct you if you said where is Peter, but it comes from the quote from St. Ambrose. He was a contemporary, he baptized St. Augustine. And when asked, where do we look for the church? He said, where Peter is, there is the church. And so that was what inspired our website. So thanks for having me. And I really enjoyed your introduction.
Oh, thank you, Mike. And before we get into the questions, everyone, I first want to tell you, Mike's article is in the show notes in the video, in the description area of the video. So you can go back after this discussion and read the entire article. Let me show it to them real quick though, Mike, okay?
Sure.
Because I'll screen share it and they can see it. Here it is right here, everyone. Straight answers, the reasons behind restricting the Latin Mass. And Mike wrote this on October 7th, 2025, and he has really created a firestorm, which is really unbelievable to me, Mike, that this happened, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the way I intended to frame the article, or I mean, in the introduction of the article, I noted how a couple of prominent online traditionalists had asked, like, why is this happening? What motivates? What's wrong with the traditional Latin Mass that Rome wants to restrict it, and that these bishops want to restrict it? And I kind of thought, after 4 years of this, since Traditionis Custodes came out, do they really not know? Do they really still not know? And then I thought about it a little bit more, and I thought, I've been debating with traditionalists, and my website has been addressing, and a lot of people like yourself have been addressing these questions of, what is the church's real position on the papacy, on the living magisterium, on Vatican II, on liturgy, on the liturgical reform? Like, these are questions that are often posed as a debate with traditionalists. And I think in a lot of cases, they will still approach, if the Pope puts out a teaching, Amoris Laetitia, for example, or the death penalty teaching, they see that as something that is open for them to disagree with publicly and say that the Pope has committed error. And the angle that I took, and I appreciate your framing of it as a little bit, it might sting, it's a little bit harsh, but I spent 7 years working with the USCCB, so I got to understand the inside angle of the church there. And then since I've started the website, I'm in contact with bishops and cardinals and Vatican reporters and theologians and priests who are high up in the church. And there's a conversation going on, especially outside of the US. They keep saying, what's wrong with the US church? What's wrong with traditionalism in the US? And so I wanted to lay out starkly, just, you can agree or disagree, But these are the things that are causing Rome to act this way. This is what motivated Pope Francis.
Okay. So before we go down that road, let me ask you this critical question. Okay, Mike?
Sure.
Because I know you frame this as a critical juncture that we're in. The current polarization must end. It's either unity or schism. So is schism really imminent? What does that look like?
Well, there's the whole de facto and de jure schism. You take the SSPX, for example. Their bishops were excommunicated in 1988. The excommunications were lifted in 2009, I believe. But Pope Benedict, when he lifted that excommunication, he said they don't perform any official function in the church. They still need to come into full communion. Pope Francis gave an indult to facilitate valid confessions and valid marriages within the SSPX, which, having spoken to Vatican cardinals about this decision, the position of Rome, the position of Pope Francis, was that up until 2016 or 2015, when Pope Francis put out that extended those faculties, their confessions and their marriages were invalid.
And wasn't there baptisms too?
The baptisms are valid because if you use the formula, there are certain the reason why the confessions and the marriages were considered invalid was because to perform those, the priest or the minister, or if it's a deacon or you have an exception, that person needs to have jurisdiction to witness the marriage from the local bishop. And because the SSPX was not doing that, like, for example, a rogue priest doesn't have faculties to hear confessions. And that's essentially because they weren't recognized by the local bishop. The SSPX wasn't considered to have that. But as we know, if a priest that doesn't have faculties, he can still say a valid but illicit mass, or he could still illicitly baptize someone even though he's not a recognized minister of the church. So
what about Vigano? I call him Mr. Vigano.
Oh yeah,
he's excommunicated. I mean, he's formed a schism too.
Yeah. Correct? So it seems, well, he's been formally excommunicated. He was in 2024. He's a sedevacantist, which, if that term is familiar to you, it's people who deny that the Pope is the Pope. And in his case, I don't think he at least doesn't believe that the last two popes have been valid, Leo or Francis. But it seems that he teamed up with one of the original four SSPX bishops, Bishop Richard Williamson, who actually got kicked out of the SSPX after the excommunication was lifted. And then he started ordaining bishops all over the place and ordaining priests on his own. And they have a group called the SSPX Resistance that he started. Supposedly, he conditionally consecrated Vigano a bishop. Now, Vigano had been ordained a bishop by John Paul II, but he underwent a traditional one by Bishop Williamson, just because maybe there were doubts about the validity of John Paul II ordaining him a bishop. He has kind of gone rogue. Williamson has passed away. I heard he was living in northern Italy for a while, and he was ordaining rogue priests. There was a bishop in the diocese, I think, of Superior in Wisconsin. Is that Wisconsin? There was a priest and a sister. Well, people that were running around calling themselves a priest and a sister, and they'd set up a retreat center in his diocese. And he wrote a public letter to the diocese saying, these people don't have any faculties. They're not recognized by the diocese. And the last paragraph said, by the way, Archbishop Vigano, if you are reading this, my understanding is that you ordained this guy a priest, like clandestinely. And so these people that are being sent to him, and he's ordaining them, and he's sending these radical traditionalists, and this is a step beyond what's within the church. However, there are plenty of people, plenty of Catholic YouTubers and bloggers and columnists who will share the message of Archbishop Vigano, who will
As
look at
if
him.
he is in good standing with the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Or
They
more,
never acknowledge the fact that he's excommunicated. I
well,
think it's so deceptive.
yeah. And I mean, the point is, they don't even, good standing with New Church, with Novus Ordoism, doesn't even matter to them anymore. You know,
Yeah,
they
that's
just
true,
consider it,
Mike.
this is a real Catholic. And
Mhm.
it's funny because the word Catholic means universal.
Ursel,
It's
mhm.
the universal church. And it, you know, communion, unity, we think of these words, and it's right there in the catechism. The Pope is the visible source of unity in the church. So it's really odd, and this is, you know, a comment I see on social media all the time, is when they say so and so is actually a real Catholic, or this, you know, this bishop is actually Catholic, or this parish is actually Catholic. And it's like, this person thinks the Pope is a heretic and calls him, you know, just calls him Prevost or Bergoglio, depending on who it is, and trashes the bishops and all kinds of things like that. Um, and
I don't know if you know this, Mike, but on my channel, if anyone comments or puts in the chat Prevost or Bergoglio, they're automatically um, kicked out of the
oh wow,
channel.
yeah. I mean, we had to,
I won't
um,
stand for that
yeah.
disrespect.
Oh yeah, and we had to get rid of our comment section. I mean, I don't know how many
Oh,
trolls have been. I mean, ours is a print website, so somebody could have gone to an article that was written 2 years before and written a huge diatribe. And I talked to a few other, you know, a few bloggers and people who ran websites, and even traditionalist ones like, I think, Crisis and 1 Peter 5 got rid of their comment sections because it was just too out of control. I mean, in some ways it brings traffic, but in other ways, if the same people keep coming back to the website, um, it's like, it becomes like a sewer.
well,
But yeah, no,
what happens is, Mike, it happens on my YouTube channel. One person will comment dump 20 comments on one YouTube video and
mhm,
just dominate that YouTube video comment section. And that's what they're trying to do to
yeah,
your websites. Yeah.
absolutely. And so I guess to go back to the original point, they don't really care about the official position of the church. Like, what does the church officially teach on this? And they don't. And what I was trying to get across was, wait a minute, um, you may not care what the official teaching of the church is, or you may have decided that the official teaching of the church is that ecumenism is evil and religious liberty is heresy. But the church doesn't think that. And as much as someone might act like church authority doesn't exist, and frankly, as little as church authority actually acts. I mean, think about how long it took to excommunicate Vigano. It was like 6 years from his initial letter.
Yeah.
And it was getting pretty bad by 2020 or so. He was using QAnon, you know, references and stuff, and always calling him Bergoglio. Um, the church is very slow to act in some ways, and the fact that the church hasn't excommunicated this guy or that guy. I mean, there's a retired bishop in Texas who I believe is still alive. He's about 102 or 103 right now. Bishop Rene Gracida, who's the emeritus bishop of Corpus Christi, Texas. He's been a sedevacantist, like on his personal blog and in various videos since like 2017. And he hasn't been excommunicated. You know, I think he's sort of in hiding. So there's no, like, I don't know, maybe the current bishop of Corpus Christi doesn't think he's culpable and doesn't want to ruffle feathers. Sometimes they don't even know what's going on in their diocese, and it's not, they live in too much of a, you know, a silo that they aren't paying attention to what's going on. But that's not, so when it goes all the way up to the papal level, and you see these dioceses where people are running amok and all this craziness is happening online, and all these people are saying all of these making all of these attacks on the authority of the church. What Rome can do is they can send an order down and say, let's start shutting it down. Let's start restricting it. And the reason why I wanted to make a concrete list is, okay, these are things that you like to debate. I understand that. I understand you have your opinion. Everyone has their opinion. But your opinions are considered erroneous or
Okay, let's
schismatic.
go through
Yes.
the list. That was my next question, the list.
Sure.
Let's go through it. So on there is the rejection of the papal magisterial authority. So calling the Pope a heretic. I'm going to read your list and then you respond. Okay. So calling the Pope a heretic. We have seen this all over social media. We know this is true. This is happening.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, the idea, there are plenty of papal documents. If you go all the way back to Pastor Eternus from Vatican I, it says that the deposit of the faith is passed down without blemish through the successors of the apostles, and especially the successor of Peter. Back in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance, there were some debates about what would happen if a pope was a heretic. A lot of people like St. Robert Bellarmine put forward a couple of hypothetical questions, but he said the main proof that a pope has never been a heretic, or that a pope can't be a heretic, is the fact that 1600 years later, or what, no pope has been a heretic. Now, I know that there are heretical popes in history that people will argue, or they'll make the argument that Pope Honorius was a heretic, or Pope John the 22nd, and then obviously post Vatican II, they think everyone's a heretic since then. But if you read what Leo the 13th and Pius the 10th and Pius the 12th, Benedict the 15th, what you read all of these popes before Vatican I, like after Vatican I and before Vatican II. So this is an era that they think is valid. All of them argue that you have to defer to the Pope. If it becomes between you and the Pope, you've got to go, or between, anyone, between somebody that's saying that the Pope is in error or the church is in error and the Pope, you stick with the Pope. Every schism in history, you look at it and you see the old Catholics, you see Martin Luther. It's always this group against the Pope. And the people who stand with the Pope are the ones who are not in schism. It doesn't mean every Pope is a great Pope. It doesn't mean that on a prudential level, they might make a lot of bad calls. We obviously know about a lot of popes who are very sinful. But what I found, what disturbed me, and one of the reasons why we started the website overall is, okay, I can understand if you think that Amoris Laetitia, maybe the rules for divorced and remarried Catholics and whether or not to allow them to receive sacraments under certain conditions. I can understand if your position is, I don't like it because it could be abused. People might, be too lax about it. They might misinterpret it and think that it's, permission for everyone. But to call people who are actually accepting the teaching from the Pope, calling those people heretics because they're accepting what the Pope taught, it's totally backwards. I mean, we can have different interpretations of things. Just to sort of fly off and going a little bit aside, but you take, for example, the question of unbaptized infants. Mm-hmm. There's limbo was the tradition for a long time. A lot of people in the past probably thought it was doctrine or dogma. Now it doesn't appear in the Bible anywhere, and it sort of took off later on. But then in more recent years, we've talked about, especially with John Paul, but even before that, when the Catechism came out, it said, we entrust these souls to the mercy of God in the hope that he can find a means of salvation. And it's amazing because how people will insist that you have to believe, and limbo is on the edge of hell. Like, that's what, supposedly they don't suffer. I don't understand how, if you're not in the beatific vision and in heaven, how you cannot suffer unless they totally take away your mind. And so, I mean, my wife and I had a miscarriage a couple of years ago, and we'd love to be reunited with baby James someday,
Mm-hmm.
and have our whole family made whole. And the fact that the church allows that, and the fact that we don't know, like, for people to just come out and condemn something that's a perfectly reasonable view by the church. Now, this isn't necessarily one of the specific issues I listed, because limbo has been illicit belief, and we don't know for certain. I guess you're free to. Someone once asked me, but why would you? I don't know what your position is on that, but I mean, that's the kind of thing. It's they
Well, if
take
I
their
tell you my position, everybody's going to say I'm a Protestant. And I'll
Oh,
tell you what
yeah.
my position is. All right. I mean, I know that we had limbo. We were supposed to believe in limbo, and then they took it away. My position is this: that innocent soul did nothing wrong. A miscarriage, for me, 2 abortions. That sin is mine. That awful, awful sin I committed is mine. Thank God he forgave me. That's not their fault.
Yep.
I believe they're in the arms of Jesus.
Well, so do I.
That's what I believe.
And it's a totally Catholic belief, but
Yeah.
we might be criticized by a traditionalist who won't accept that.
Oh, no, they won't accept that at all.
Yeah.
And
they
you know what, another thing they won't accept? They won't accept God's mercy.
Yeah.
I have been criticized up one side and down the other about my near-death experience, that I died with mortal sin in my soul. And when I died, I cried out to God and asked for his mercy, and he gave it to me. I asked for his forgiveness, and he gave it to me. But I had all kinds of traditionalists just, condemning me about that. You should have went to hell. You should have never been able to come back. You didn't have a near death. You wouldn't believe it, Mike.
They say the
Well, actually, you probably would believe it.
Oh, I mean, I've been there. I mean, you're in this.
Yeah.
You're in this the same world that I've been in it maybe a little bit longer. Or I mean, I'm sure there's infighting in traditionalism too. So even when you were, more militant in your churching, to use an expression, even then, it's like they're fighting. There's infighting. But no, I mean, it's amazing. It's like middle school almost, where they it's like they just, and this isn't all traditionalists, granted, but it's like
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Mike. Are these positions truly widespread, or are they amplified by social media? And do you think the majority of TLM actually holds these views? Because I personally don't think they do.
Well, the way I framed it is that every single public traditionalist that I am aware of, some don't speak on certain issues. They're silent.
Yes,
but they
you're
don't
right.
take on these issues. And I'll use, for example, I don't know if you remember the film trilogy Mass of the Ages. It was about the traditional Latin Mass. It was a crowdsourced documentary.
What was it called?
Mass of the Ages.
I don't think I've ever seen
okay.
that one.
So it was very popular, and the thing is, it was to promote the traditional Latin Mass, and it was and so it's a traditional documentary. They have cut scenes of, beautiful scenes from the Mass. They have people telling personal stories, and then they bring in the expert, and so it would say, like, Peter Kwasniewski, lecturer, philosopher, like whatever his label was underneath, him. And I'm very familiar with his writing, and I've heard him call the Sacrosanctum Concilium. I've heard him, or I've read his writing where he's called that document from Vatican II about reforming the liturgy. In his article, he's calling it a Trojan horse and how it was setting the stage to destroy the Mass. Well, in this documentary, he's saying, well, it's the document on its surface is okay, but then what they did to it was blah blah blah. Or they've got Taylor Marshall all cleaned up and in a suit talking about how beautiful the ancient liturgy is and how horrible it would be to have it taken away. And it's like,
And you know something, Mike? It is a beautiful
it is,
liturgy.
yes.
It is a beautiful liturgy. Here's the problem, though. There isn't enough priests that even know how
Yeah.
to say the Latin Mass. And second, most Catholics that try to go to the TLM Mass end up going back to the Novus Ordo because they don't understand a thing of what's going on.
Yeah.
And they're
And I
too
think,
confused.
oh yeah. Well, and so the point that I'm making here is, where are these traditionalists who publicly disagree with this stuff? Because they have the same people who are throwing
They
bombs on one end of the internet, showing up for these popular things and arguing in favor of it. And it's like they've just, cleaned up and put on a tie and combed their hair. And now they're saying, things about how, of course, we, respect the Pope. And of course, and then they're calling him a heretic at other times. And it's like,
Well,
well,
let me tell you
yeah,
why. Let me tell you something, and you probably already know this. The audience knows it. There are traditionalists that are afraid to come forward.
oh,
They're
yeah.
afraid to come forward because they will be attacked by people within the traditional movement.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've gotten the emails.
Oh, I have too. And
Yeah.
I mean, I get emails almost, at one point it was like weekly, where they were, and it was funny because you hear from a current traditionalist who's defending traditionalism on the internet or whatever, and they're like, come visit my parish, you don't see anything like that, we are all totally on board with the Pope and blah blah blah. And then you get emails from ex-traditionalists, or these traditionalists who are like keeping their heads down, and they say everything you said about it is true,
Mhm.
and I'm afraid to say anything. And it's a little bit of duplicity. But to go back, this is sort
But
of the,
wait a minute,
yeah.
Mike. Wait a minute. Don't you think, and I'm doing a video about
Mhm.
this coming up, don't you think this feeds into scruple? I can never say that word.
Scrupulosity.
Thank you. Don't you think it feeds that?
Yeah, I think it does. Well, I think when people want to say up the level of their Catholicism, let's say you've had a reversion or a conversion, didn't take your faith very seriously as a teenager, maybe now you've got kids and you want to become serious about your faith. You want to undo your mistakes that maybe you made when you were younger. And traditionalism, the TLM community, what they're offering, or what they claim to offer, is the prepackaged world of idealized Catholicism. People they're all dressed up to go to mass. They have big families. They have, the wives all make jam, or, I mean, it's a whole, it's, they talk about all the vocations, all the children, all the young people, all the like-minded people. And yes, there's definitely something to finding a community. And there's, and I know firsthand, because I grew up in a very conservative Catholic family, but I wasn't really socialized with conservative Catholic kids. Like, I just went to the regular Catholic school and then the liberal Catholic high school. And so I'm like fighting with my religion teachers, when I'm a sophomore at high school, and, my friends are all, they all stopped going to mass after confirmation. And so I understand, like, I've seen that environment,
Well,
and
Mike, I'm a little older than you. So I grew up in Catholic guilt.
oh, well, no, I grew up with it in my family, but not in my,
Well,
but not in
I
my
grew up
world.
with it.
So yeah, and so yeah, so I'm it, so it's one of those things where there's this advertised side, and I think that's a lot of what Pope Benedict saw when he liberalized the Latin Mass. I mean, he said, there are lots of young people who accept Vatican II, they accept the authority of the Pope, they accept the living magisterium, but they have a great love for liturgical tradition. And I mean, you were probably around in the 70s and the 80s during the experiments, during the era where, liturgical dance and, I don't know, all
We
that
didn't
liturgical.
have that.
Oh, you
No,
didn't have that? Okay.
no, I grew up in the 60s, so I went through grade
Yeah.
school in the Latin Mass. Then when I was in high school is when Vatican II hit.
Yeah.
I mean, we had guitar mass,
Hmm.
which it didn't bother
Okay.
my parents either, but that's about the extent of it
Okay.
as far as,
Well, it's
veering
funny. My
off.
mom was born in 1951, so she was a little older than you, but so her.
Okay, I was born in 55.
Okay. So, oh, you're the same age as the Pope then. He was born.
Yeah,
Okay. Wow.
yeah.
So, but no, my mom, so her dad was sort of a very strict pre-Vatican II kind of Catholic. He didn't like any of the changes. And here's the thing, the parish that they belonged to in Maryland was like the destination parish of all of the most progressive and experimental Catholics out there. Um, the priest would. There were a lot of things that I remember one story. Apparently, the priest would, like, on Palm Sunday one year, he rode up the aisle on a donkey. Um, there are all these legendary stories about this parish, and my grandfather was so traditional that it never occurred to him to go to a parish outside of the boundaries of where he lived.
Oh, you
So
want to
they
go
were
to
like in the
another
epicenter.
parish.
So he just wrote a lot of letters to the bishop. That's what wound up happening. But no. So but it's like, yeah, there were a lot of abuses, and I'm sure in some places there still are, but I don't see them. And I think a lot of people who take their faith seriously nowadays, they don't, unless they have a destination parish that they want to go to where those kinds of abuses are habitual. I don't really think that it's as much. I think that those concerns finally have died down. And I know you mentioned on a recent episode that you haven't seen liturgical abuse yet. Although,
And Mike, I go to a lot of different
Mhm,
parishes. It's probably not good that I do that. I mostly go to St. Elizabeth's Seton,
mhm.
but I do go to St. Joan of Arc, St. Luke's, um, uh, Our Lady of Carmel. I go to a lot of different, and I've never ever experienced anything but a reverent uh, Novus Ordo.
Yeah, I mean, I've run into things at, traveling a couple of times, but even then, it's not really, it might be, 14 extraordinary ministers, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe the music is a little jazzy. In terms of, I mean, people say that they go to places where priests make up the words to the consecration, but I've never seen that
I've never heard
firsthand.
that.
Um, but I guess to go back to the original thing, there are regular people in the pews who just want to go to a Latin mass.
Yes.
They're just, this is the way it was when I grew up. This is, or I think that this is more reverent, or I don't like having to shake anyone's hand. Whatever your reasons are. They aren't reading the blogs. They might be following the news. They might be, staunch in certain views on certain things, but you know, most of the people who go to mass aren't having the conversations that we're having. So I think when the Latin mass is taken away from them, it does feel like a betrayal, because what have they been doing? I mean, who knows what they believe? Who knows how orthodox they are? Um, but they're just rank and file Catholics whose brains don't work the way that the public traditionalist or even you and me. It's like they aren't thinking about what's going on in Rome, or they may
No.
not know the name of the bishop. Um, and that's in both the Latin Mass and the English Mass, which is why one of the proposals that I made is, why not, I think if they had Latin Novus Ordo, yeah, they might not be 100% thrilled with it, but at least it's the Latin Mass. At least it has chant. At least the priest is reverent. At least they, maybe keep the communion rail up and all of those kinds of things. And I think that most ordinary Catholics would probably be fine with that. Um, it's the ideologue. So I mean, if you want to look at the
Well, Mike,
teachings or or the list that I made, but it's
let me push back there a little
yeah.
bit, okay? So back in the 70s, when Vatican II rolled out, we were in that same position, right? We went from Latin Mass now to the New Order, right? So we had to learn to adapt.
Yeah.
We're going through the same thing right now with a very small minority of people. But if you looked on social media, you would think 90% of the United States was going to a TLM mass. And that's not true.
And they've used the internet to their advantage. I mean, if you
Yes.
think about which bishops are online, or which priests are online. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of normal ones too. But a lot of times they say, a lot of people would say to me, don't give them any oxygen. We don't want to give attention to. That was the way that the church used to work. Back in the 70s, there was Archbishop Lefebvre. He had his little movement. That, there were some in the United States. There were a few priests in the United States that kind of broke away too. And they got a little tiny bit of attention. The excommunications, I think, were in like the New York Times and the Washington Post, but it wasn't part of day-to-day reality for most Catholics. Now you have some like Michael Matt, whose dad was one of the editors of The Wanderer, and that's when the Wanderer and the Remnant broke off with each other in 1967, I think. The Wanderer stayed with the Pope, and the Remnant became, I guess, sympathetic to the SSPX, although I don't know that they're pure. They're just promoting tradition as they understand it. But he talks about going to these clandestine masses. It'd be like a furniture store before it opens on Sunday morning, and some priest who had just driven 50 miles from some other location, to do a 6 a.m. mass, and then you're at the 7:30 a.m. mass, and it was this movement of people who really had this state, they had their skin in the game, I guess is I guess if you're going to pick up and move your family, there was I read a memoir from someone who grew up in a traditionalist family with 10 kids, and her dad decided to uproot in the 70s and move the whole family to Portugal because Mary told Sister Lucia that Portugal would not lose the faith. And so they all moved to Portugal, and they go to mass, and it's just a Novus Ordo with guitar, and he didn't have the internet, so he didn't. So they lived in Portugal for like a year before they could move back to the United States, but they didn't find the faith there. But these are people who nowadays all it takes is some 16-year-old kid who decides that he wants to be hardcore, and you see this whole trend with rad trads and groypers and the alt-right, and they decide they all mimic the same arguments. It's not like they're coming up with anything new. And yeah, it's become an online movement. And that's one of the things. We don't know how extreme or how many people are affected by this online extremism. I mean, the trolls, sometimes I wonder, like, is it the same guy creating like 100 accounts and attacking me over and over and over again?
I thought the same thing. Honestly, Mike, I thought they're either bots that some entity outside of the United States is trying to create this schism in the church, or it's a group of people who have set up a bunch of different accounts that are just spewing out this nonsense. I've had the same thought.
And I would think that was accountable for all of it, except there are enough people out there who say the same things under their own name.
Yeah.
And some of them are actual people that I've met or that I know, or, who people I know,
we know who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So even if they are just echoing these people, it's not like they don't have influence. It's not like some of these people don't have, 1 million YouTube followers, or they aren't being, I mean, sometimes people will get an editorial in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal to promote some of these views. They are kind of rising to prominence, and people are writing articles about how this movement is getting bigger in the Catholic Church. I think the numbers really just aren't they aren't that big. But then there's sort of the online people who are aggressively pushing this stuff.
Well,
My
Mike,
guess
it's
is some of them,
marketing.
yeah.
It's marketing.
Oh yeah, and the Catholic Church, meanwhile, it's like, most bishops, it's like they have a monthly column on their diocesan website.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, if that, now that now that half the diocesan papers have closed, it's like, and who read those anyway? It's like they're not actively engaging these problems, and the thing is, Rome is seeing these problems, and
Do you think, okay,
yeah,
I'm glad you went there. Without naming names, you get invited to the Jubilee to report on the Jubilee. You come back and then you turn against Pope Leo. Start criticizing Pope Leo, starts down the same path that everybody else has taken because negativity sells on YouTube.
yeah.
I'm going to ask you this question because I believe, just from the interviews I've seen of Pope Leo, he is very well aware of what's going on.
I think so. He's the first pope who's ever been online. He had a Twitter account that
Mm-hmm.
they deleted, but he was retweeting and liking things. And I saw a Facebook comment he made. He was arguing with his brother about something. So, yeah.
Okay, so
So
let's
what's your
go
question?
into, because to me, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, Mike, okay? Because I'm just a shabby Catholic. That's all I am, is a shabby Catholic. I have no degree in theology. My business is a sales coaching firm. So I know about sales, I know about marketing, and I know about mindset, because that really is my wheelhouse. To me, it boils down to accepting the authority of the priest, of the bishop, of the archbishop, of the cardinal, of the pope. Where am I wrong?
I don't think you are. I mean, I think that's what it comes down to. If you are just a regular Catholic, like the people who wind up at the Latin Mass, the people who, they don't know about a certain teaching, and it's like, there are people out there who think, I don't know everything about that the church teaches. I'm trying to educate myself. I'm trying to be catechized, but I've got these people disagreeing over what the church teaches on, let's contraception. Let's use an
Mhm.
issue that wouldn't, interestingly, it's controversial everywhere else, but not here. And you want to know, what is the church's official teaching on contraception? Let's say your friend tells you, oh, the church doesn't worry about that anymore. Maybe your parish priest, it's not so much anymore, but in the past I've heard that they're like, oh, well, you've got a lot of kids and a headache, so where do you look? You look to the Pope for the official teaching of the church. And that's what my whole list is. It's like, I understand that you have your disagreement with what the Pope and Vatican II and the Catechism, what these things teach. But if your intention is to be an Orthodox Catholic who follows the church, who thinks with the church, who is in line with the church, where does the ordinary Catholic go? I mean, you Google something and you've got, you Google Catholic teaching on whatever, and you might wind up with Crisis Magazine, you might wind up
Yeah.
with 1 Peter 5, you might wind up with Catholic Answers, you might wind up Where Peter Is, National Catholic Reporter. You might get all of these, all of these distortions. But at the end of the day, the Pope is the center of unity in the church. And that's the reason why we have a hierarchy in a lot of ways, is because we can spend our time doing works of charity, building up our spiritual life, praying, educating. We don't have to have these arguments in an ideal world, because we have the magisterium. And if you look at The Catechism's definition of the magisterium, CCC 100, paragraph 100, it defines the magisterium as the Pope and the bishops in communion with him. So you'll have traditionalists say, oh, I don't, this new living magisterium, that's heretical, that's modernist. I believe in the perennial magisterium. But people, the definition of magisterium comes from the word teacher in Latin, but it's the teaching office of the church, which means that somebody has to hold that office, which is the Pope and the bishops in communion with him. And if the bishops are teaching out of communion with the Pope, then they're not teaching authentically. And it says, and it takes it right from Dei Verbum, which is one of the Vatican II documents, that the magisterium is the authentic interpreter of scripture and tradition. So that teaching is as clear as a bell to me. When we were talking on the phone, we were both sort of talking about our wake up points.
Yeah.
Because I was a very hard-line right-wing conservative Catholic. And in a lot of, I mean, I'm still a conservative. You know, people call me a Marxist, and I'm like, yes, I'm one of those humanae vitae Marxists that everyone's, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well,
you know?
I was warned about you. I was told you were a modernist Catholic and not to listen to you.
Well, you know, I never considered myself a modernist. I mean, the word modernist is thrown around.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a modernist in Pius X's day it came out of liberal Protestantism, and what it was somebody who denied the supernatural. So they'd say, well, when you die, your soul literally doesn't, you live on in our hearts, you know, and in a way that's maybe, or Christ, he was truly God and truly man in the sense of, you know, he was really nice. And, you know, I mean, you know, the resurrection, you know, maybe it was symbolic. That is a modernist. Okay. I'm not a modernist at all. I believe in the creeds. I believe in the church. I believe that Christ founded the church. There are a lot of, I believe in miracles.
I do too.
And so, yeah, I mean, I just went off base, but, or off track, but, yeah, people are, I was talking about how it started. And what it was, it's funny because I was reading different blogs, because that was my magisterium. And these people would be saying things like religious liberty is heretical, and you can interpret the document from Vatican II on religious liberty in this way. And basically the way that they said it could be interpreted was that there really wasn't religious liberty. Or torture, for example. It's in Gaudium et Spes, and then it's in Evangelium Vitae, in which, you know, is the Gospel of Life document that John Paul II wrote in 1995, I think, on torture, listing torture as an intrinsic evil. And I was reading different commentaries on different blogs, and there were people arguing about, well, that doesn't really count, or, you know, they had these differing ideas of what constituted torture, or whether you actually had to listen to this document because, well, it wasn't infallible. So, you know, and so I went to a priest. I was working for the USCCB at the time, and I think it was a little bit before Francis became Pope. So it was like 2011, 2012. And I'm like, and it's a really weird experience to work in a building with like 10 priests, and then you would go down to the cafeteria and have these off the wall, you know, theological, you know, spitball sessions and ask questions. And so a priest he's my older daughter's godfather, but he worked there, and I asked him, how do you know when the stuff that the Pope teaches is heretical or not? Like, because I had just been listening to all these voices, and he looked at me like I had three heads. He's like, what do you mean?
What brought that on?
And I'm like, well, you know, like some of his teachings, they don't really line up with tradition. And he's like, that's not, and he showed me several documents. Pastor Eternus from Vatican I was one. There was also Lumen Gentium, which is one of the Vatican II documents. And then there's a document that was written by Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was the CDF head, so later Benedict XV, called the primacy of the successor of Peter in the mystery of the church. And it's like 100-page little booklet, and it's free online. You can read, on the Vatican website. And it basically spells out what the role of the papacy is. And I was sort of shocked to read that the Pope is the guarantor of fidelity to the gospel. And it sort of shook. I thought that all these people online, they had access to some book somewhere. Like, are they reading Denzinger or Ott? Like, how do they know what the church really teaches when the Pope is supposedly teaching heresies half the time? And I didn't, somehow I just sort of thought the magisterium was like some abstract. I never really thought about where does it come from? What's the basis of that? And when I woke up to that, and Benedict was Pope, and I thought, so I had grown up with Freemason conspiracy theories and so I was born in 1979. So altar girls, I was 15 years old. I was an altar boy. Like, that was the worst decision. Like, I devastated, like, my whole family. It was like, if we were going to serve with girls, like, that was the end of the world, but this is the kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just sort of thought Orthodoxy was just like a big pile of stuff, sort of like we were the family that received communion in the tongue. We were, and it was just sort of like all these rules. And I didn't really understand where the rules come from, so Catholic guilt. Yeah, I understood all the guilt too, because I knew it's like, oh my goodness, it's like if I was, let's say I was on my way to confession and I got hit by a car, like, like that was the kind of, and not that there is no truth to that.
Yeah,
but
my mother used to always say, make sure you have on clean underwear and you've gone to confession.
So here I am at the, sort of the tail end of Benedict's papacy, and all of, living in Washington, D.C., we sort of have a young adult Catholic conservative culture.
Oh, is that where you grew up, in Washington,
Yeah,
D.C.?
grew up in Washington, right outside in the Maryland suburbs. And I, outside of 1 year in Philadelphia, that's where I've been pretty much my whole life. So I'm one of the few, like, native Washingtonians, and I'm in the Archdiocese of Washington. And my brother's a priest of the Archdiocese too. So,
oh, really?
So we raised a Novus Ordo. Now, granted, we were, we were the pious family, but yeah, we did launch we did have a priestly vocation in the Novus Ordo. So, but yeah, once I started, so I'm like thinking like that all of my friends who were like these hardcore JP2 and Pope Benedict Catholics, I'm like, I'm finally caught up to you. I finally accept Vatican II. We're reading papal documents together and not like casting doubt on them. And then in 2013, Pope Francis was elected. And so just like any conservative Catholic, I'm a little rattled by some of the things that he's saying. And, he's going to do mass in a prison on Holy Thursday. I don't know how I feel about that. And started to get up. And then I was like, you know what? It's sort of like I've got all of these Pope skills now. It's like I've had this, and I had a conversion experience. I haven't even gone through that, but there were things, and it was Pope Benedict really who his series Jesus of Nazareth.
Oh yeah, I've got those books. Yeah,
changed my relationship with Jesus. When he talks about the parable of the prodigal son, and he says it should be called the parable of the elder brother.
Yes,
and I was like, that's me. It's like the elder brother wasn't holy. He was angry at the little brother because the little brother did all the things that he really deep down wanted to do, and it was sort of like transformative. Like, I've been doing this wrong, this jealousy, this resentment, like I resent my favorite saint. He's not a saint in the Western Church, but he's revered in the Eastern Church, Constantine.
Oh yeah.
He didn't get baptized until his deathbed. So it's like, you never go to confession. He just, and straight to heaven. Like, that was like why did my parents like catechize me? I could be, why was I baptized as a baby? So just an amazing, I mean, so it's sort of, I'd had this sort of transformation. I had a very good pastor who, I had gone to a very traditionalist church, and then the parish where I had been raised, actually, it wasn't traditionalist when I was a kid, but it became more and more traditionalist. And my family, we moved back to this area, and my parents were still going there. And then there were issues with the pastor, and there was kind of a falling out, and we wound up at another church nearby. And right after we moved to that parish, a new priest came in. And when Pope Francis talks about smelling like the sheep, like, so this is a priest who, Father Dan, um, who, I mean, it was just astounding. First homily he gave when he got there, he's like, now I'm terrible. I have a terrible memory, and I'm terrible at names. But my goal is to
Just
learn
like me.
every single one of your names.
Wow.
And he did. And not only that, it was sort of like he would meet with people all day. He would, I mean, it never occurred to me, like, if I was going through a life crisis, to call up my pastor and go, but that's what people were doing. He was saving marriages. He was, bringing, helping couples who were lukewarm become, on fire for faith. Our RCIA classes were just huge compared to, I mean, so I guess there are a lot of parishes, like Latino parishes might have a class of like 35 people entering the church. But like, it's like when our list would come out, it would be, our parish is pretty multicultural, but it was mostly like, Jane Jones and Margie Smith. And, it's sort of like, we'd have just as many, we have 20 people coming into the church. So it was amazing, the conversions and the amount of activity. And so when Pope Francis became Pope, and he starts talking about, the stuffy, rigid pastor, and then the pastor who's with the people, who knows their problems, who is accompanying them. It was like these two pictures came into my mind, my old pastor and my current pastor. And I was like, I get it. I'm going along with this. I'm not going to let the old traditionalist temptation get to me. I'm going to listen to what Pope Francis says and try to learn from him. And that, I mean, it was transformative to me. And I was working in the publishing office at the USCCB. So all of his, so we did book versions of like his weekly audiences. And when Evangelii Gaudium came out, like, I got the manuscript a couple of days before it was released to the public, and they're like, start laying out this book right now. So I'm laying out the official, book version of the Pope's first exhortation. And I'm reading it. So it's sort of like, as it's going live, I'm paying attention to all this. And then about maybe a year or two into his papacy, I started to notice, I was like hearing all of my, my friends on Facebook, or, going to church groups and stuff, they're all complaining about Pope Francis. And I'm like, what, I'm like, I thought these were all of my Vatican II, JP2 Catholic friends. Like, what? And all of a sudden they all hate the Pope. Like, what's going on? So the thing is, with me, I was kind of an early adopter of Pope Francis, but it's because of, I was already there. I was all, when I started seeing my friends talk about like Freemasons infiltrating the Curia and stuff, I was like, I got over that when I was like 22, and they're just
Well,
discovering it at like 40. And
the difference is, Mike, you were reading the documents.
Yeah.
Most people don't. I encourage my audience, don't take my word for it. Go read the documents.
Yeah.
Right. And what they're doing is, if you're going to take the time to read a ex post, or read an article written by these, well, I'll just say written by Catholic media, do not take their word for it. Go straight to the document and read it yourself. Don't get caught up into their bias. Form your own opinion. Go read it yourself.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why we started the website, was people do need those sources to help sometimes to help explain what's going on or how it all fits in. But a lot of the sources that I used to go to read about, EWTN and Register and, some of these sites, it's like none of them were explaining what was going on. They were pushing the anti-Francis narrative. Exactly. And so it was like, somebody needs to backfill. what's going on here. And I mean, we talked about the Pachamama controversy, and the left wing or mainstream media, they're just covering the synod. They're covering, oh, or they're going to be women deacons and married priests.
Right.
And on the but on the right, or on the traditionalist conservative side, all they're writing about is that they're worshiping demons in the Vatican gardens with the Pope's approval. And fortunately for us, at Where Peter Is, we have Pedro Gabriel, who you've brought up a couple of times
Oh,
on the podcast before.
he's very good.
Well, he's Portuguese.
Yes.
And so he speaks Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and English. And so he was able to dig through a lot of these sources, because Brazil, they're Portuguese, and other parts of the Amazon are Spanish. And he was able to get to the source and do this deep dive on because ordinary Catholics didn't even know what a synod was. I don't think most of them still recognize the word synod, let alone know what a synod is. But they're hearing about this Pachamama controversy at church. I mean, I heard, I would hear it. I went on a men's retreat and side conversations that it's not like every Catholic is paying attention to this stuff, but it's like, if you've got, say, a parish Bible study, and let's say it's 10 people, and 2 of them are reading the LifeSite News and 1 Peter 5, and they're getting this narrative, they're going to be telling. And I've seen, like, innocent, holy, devout Catholic people, did you know that the Pope brought a pagan statue into the Vatican gardens? And the person's like, oh my, that sounds terrible. And
Right.
it's sort of, you pick your battles, but it's like this, now this person thinks that the Pope did this terrible thing, and it's like, who's going to fix this? How are we going to fix this? And unfortunately, this seemed to be the mentality, and this is to go back to the article that we started discussing. This is the mentality that seems to be driving the TLM communities, the traditionalist movement. And I don't know, other than finding ways to get people integrated back into the church somehow, to help break these narratives that seem to have a hold on people. I mean, one of the sad things, and I wrote about it a long time ago, and boy, did the trolls really go after me for this, but it's like, my mother had interstitial lung disease, and she passed away in December of 2019. And my wife and I were the main caregivers. She was 68 years old. My dad had just died 3 years earlier from kidney cancer. So it was sort of like going through this rough time in life, plus the layoff, plus starting the starting the website. And Pachamama was October through November of that same year. And, my mom, she didn't read any of these papal documents. But like, her friends from church would come and talk to her and visit her. And what would they tell her? They would tell her what the papal posse had talked about on EWTN, and they talk about what they read in LifeSite News. And one of them, for like her birthday, got her a coffee mug that had the word vegano right across the front of it. And so the thing is, and so my mom, and she wasn't 100% there towards the, I think I entrust her to God's mercy. But it's like one of those things where she's one of the little ones who was led astray.
Yeah.
And, we had conversations about God and faith and the church and that's one of the things we would talk about, the church all the time growing up. And that's sort of how I became this person who talks about the church all the time. But anytime I brought up the faith, like my mom, she was in hospice for like the full 6 months. Almost to the day. It was kind of weird, because it seemed weird to put her in when we did, but the way timing was. But every time I would bring up the faith, she would start saying terrible things about Francis, and I wouldn't fight with her. It's like, at this point, but it was one of those things. And the very last conversation we had about faith, she basically said, this Pope has really damaged my faith. She told me that, and I didn't want to fight with her, and I didn't know what to say. And I just said, I'm sorry. But it's like, it's like the person who taught me my faith, I couldn't talk about the faith with her anymore in her
Even
last
on her
days.
deathbed. That's what's so sad,
Yeah, I mean,
Frankie.
I could
What is your
pray.
mother's name?
Patricia. Yeah. So
Patricia Lewis.
yeah,
Everybody, let's say a Hail Mary for Patricia Lewis right now. Mike, would you lead us?
sure. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And thank you.
I have a devotion to the Holy Souls in Purgatory. I will put your mother on my
Well, thank you.
list.
Well, and it's funny, she died on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception
Oh,
because it was a Monday. So the 8th fell on the second Sunday of Advent. So it was bumped just like last year. I don't know if you remember that whole, or
oh
yeah.
yeah.
So it was like last time this happened, it wasn't a holy day obligation, but but that date obviously is very special to me. And I think I don't remember her saying it, but my priest brother said that she had said she always wanted to die on a Marian feast. So because of the calendar, she did, even though it was
Oh,
December 9th. So yeah, I mean, anyway, so I wound up writing. I wanted to write an article, kind of like the one that I wrote that we were discussing. I submitted to America Magazine a sort of the pitch, and I had one line in it about my mother, and they asked, the editor wrote back and basically said, "This is a good pitch, but we'd really like it if you would write about your mom." And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But I met with my siblings, talked to some priests, kind of molded, prayed over it to what. And so what I tried to do was I tried to honor her as much as possible and point out, there was this one area though that because of this division in the church, because of, what people are saying about Pope Francis, it even caused, this spiritual rift in my family. And oh my goodness, I thought I had a thick skin before I wrote that article. And it was America Magazine's #1 article for August 2020 or something like that. I had people telling me I had betrayed my mother, that she was sickened by me up in heaven, that that I had thrown. Austin Ruse wrote that I threw grandma under the bus. I don't think you
oh
read
my
it.
gosh.
One. I mean, but Steve Skojek was like, I bet his mom was a 1 Peter 5 reader. I'm like, and I mean, I try. Other people were like,
Unfortunately, Steve has gotten a lot wrong.
yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, but it was just sort of like, oh my goodness, like, and I don't think she knew what 1 Peter 5
I don't
was.
mean to laugh,
Yeah, no, but I
Mike.
mean, it's
I
like
just
this kind of thing. It's like, it's not like I disagree with you. I basically laid my heart out. And Raymond Arroyo said my mom had good taste. So because I mentioned them in it too. That's what she watched. She sat there and watched EWTN on her deathbed all day, and she anyway that but it was sort of like I got a lot of positive feedback, and just it's human nature that the negative ones and the ones that really sting are the
yeah.
ones that are more memorable. And I mean, the fact that it was the most read, I mean, I think it really got a lot of positive
You
attention.
help more people than you'll ever be aware.
I hope so. And a lot of people actually wrote to me that they could relate,
Yeah.
that they'd had these divisions in their family over, whether it was over politics or conspiracy theories um, or religion. And it's something that's happening under the surface, and it's happening to a very specific type of Catholic. And we
Mhm.
aren't necessarily, I sort of have feet in multiple worlds almost, because I mean, there's this whole apologetics Catholic media complex, which in a lot of ways is separate from the institutional church.
Yes.
And that's what I grew up in. That's what That's what we're in right now, right? That's what we're
Right.
discussing right now. And we both work for apostolates and stuff like that that are sort of on the outside of that. Then there's the U.S. Church. Having worked for the USCCB, I saw how the wheels move, and my opinions of the bishops. Now, are they always effective? No. It's a weird position. Bishops don't apply for their jobs. They're appointed, and they could say yes or no. They're appointed based on what other people have said about them. I know some priests who I don't know anyone who's ever actually admitted to me that they've said no. But these weird spitballing conversations in the USCCB cafeteria, it's like, I'm like, what would you do if you were asked to be a bishop? And he's like, oh, I don't want to be a bishop, but out of obedience to the Holy Father, I probably say yes. Like, because so you're invited to do it, you're called to this position. Yeah, people do say no, but other people do it because they're obliged, not because they think they're going to be a great bishop. Other people think they're going to be a great bishop and turn out to be a lousy bishop, I'm sure. So what I realized is it's a lot of men who are doing their best. A lot of them are not necessarily spectacular men in any way. They aren't necessarily perceptive. They maybe aren't the best pastors. I would say 90 to 95% of them have the best of intentions. And then it's one of those things where incompetence or trusting the wrong person or something like that leads to a lot of the problems in our church. It's not like I'm a Freemason and I'm part of a secret agenda that,
Trying to destroy the
I'm not a
church from
KGB
within.
agent that's trying to destroy the church. I just don't know what I'm doing because I'm a tired old man who has a confirmation to drive to on the other side of this state, tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then
Mike, we're nearing up to an hour and a half.
Oh my goodness, sorry.
Can you believe it? So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and take some viewers' questions and comments, okay? Are you okay to stay for another 30 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, all righty. So everyone stay with us. We're going to take a quick break, give Mike a little time to recoup here, and we'll be right back. It's only 40 seconds. Yes. Welcome back, everybody. Christine Harrington here with Eternal Life Plan with Mike Lewis of Where Peter Is. I got it right, Mike.
Yes.
Stephen, thank you so much. You are so nice. Stephen is always contributing to the channel. Okay. I really appreciate it, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
My son is named Stephen. So.
Mike, we're going to have you back because I know we didn't get through your entire article.
Oh, and I do want to say one last quick thing. The third part is the Vatican, which is a whole other animal. So there's the apologetics, media world, U.S. Church, Vatican. Those are the three, and they all work differently. So that's all I was going to say. But yeah, let's go to the questions.
Okay. Go ahead, Nicole. Okay, a happy pilgrim. She is an avid follower of the channel, Mike. When Pope Francis would tell us to stop listening only to voices that agreed with us and seek out other opinions too, Mike Lewis was the only reasonable other side voice I could accept at the time.
Well, thank you. I mean, there were certainly others that were out there. I mean, we had the other Where Peter Is contributors, but I mean, we were. There were people that would write occasionally, and they'd write a good piece or two, but there wasn't the website. The website that I wanted didn't exist yet, so it's one of those things where we created our own because we wanted to comment on these things. So
Your website's beautiful, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
Very nicely done. Okay. Thank you. A happy pilgrim. All the trad broadcasters should have to make the 1989 profession of faith in public.
That is the sticking point with the SSPX. They almost came back into communion once in 1988 and once in like 2011 or 2012 under Benedict. Like, remember when they were supposedly very close? And it was the 1989 profession of faith was the document essentially that Lefebvre signed and then took his name back on. And it's because there's a paragraph in there, the third so there's the creed, and then there are 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs about the magisterium. And the third one is granting religious submission of intellect and will to what the Pope teaches on faith and morals, even if it's not infallible. Like, you have to give that benefit of the doubt to what the Pope is teaching. And the SSPX has refused to sign on to that. And I think, sadly, I think that a lot of traditionalists who are in full communion with, technically, like the FSSP and ICKSP, like all the Latin Mass groups, honestly, other than the fact that they're approved by the Pope, I don't know that they necessarily have a lot of difference in belief than Lefebvre and the SSPX.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right. Thank you, GMS. Paul is a longtime viewer too. I'd say masses being held by people in material schism is just as bad as clown masses. It's a liturgical abuse. Schism is a mortal sin, which means they should not be taking the Eucharist.
I mean, that's it's funny because, like we've talked about, there's liberal dissent and there's conservative dissent. And the liberal dissent, we talk about women priests or something like that. They'll say, I disagree with the church on women being priests. I think the church is wrong. I think that women should be priests. But if you take the conservative or the traditionalist dissenters, they're going to say the new Mass isn't the real Catholic Mass. The real Catholic Mass is the TLM. It's like they take the ownership along with them. They don't just say the church teaches that and I think the church is wrong. That's like a normal thing. they say the Novus Ordo church is wrong and I'm the true Catholic. And yeah, and so in a sense, priests who aren't supposed to be, who don't have faculties, who belong to a rogue group. I recently heard about one in England who was kicked out of his diocese for abuse, and now he's saying Latin masses for a schismatic group out there, and it's I mean, that's an abuse. He shouldn't be presenting himself as a priest at all, but I mean, to be doing that outside of the bishop, and like I said, a lot of regular Catholics just don't know. They see the church on the sign and they think it's a Catholic church and they go in and so yeah, it is an abuse of people's consciences, of their faith, of their trust. If there is someone in schism that's doing it could be the most beautiful Mass in the world, but it's still an abuse of the liturgy.
Thank you, Paul. Oh, Paul came back with more. Pope Francis admitted there were issues with the Novus Ordo, so I'm wondering if we may have a new missal soonish in Catholicism, 10 to 100 years.
I don't know. I think right now we're sort of in a phase, like I don't have any opposition to it. Like people are saying, and it's another thing is traditionalists will say that I am so beholden to the Novus Ordo. I mean, if the church was to reform the Mass again and they gave us the reasons and they felt that this was what needed to be done, it's like I'd go, okay, this is what the church is calling us to do. They say, well, what if the Pope got rid of the Novus Ordo? I say, well, if that never happened, that's never going to happen. Right. But if it were, I go to the Mass that the church said to go to, and so, okay, having spoken on top, I know a lot of liturgists. I know that there's a lot of talk about getting translations right. we
Oh,
had our
really?
well, we had our. I'm talking every language in the world.
Yeah.
So we had our lousy translation in the 70s, and now we've got our translation that is it hews very, very close to the Latin. And I mean, to me, it's like some of the prayers that the priest says are a little bit awkward. Some people really hate them, but but essentially ours is at least correct. I don't know if there's any talk about doing a wholesale reform, though. I mean, really, I mean, we talk about it took an ecumenical council to reform, the Roman Rite in the first place, and then Trent. I mean, one of the reasons they call it the Tridentine Mass is because basically they decided that they wanted to unify the liturgy. Now, it wasn't any traditionalists will tell you the story where the Roman Rite has been the same for was essentially the same for hundreds of years before that, but it was if you had it was the rite that was celebrated in Rome, but if you were in another city, you might have had a totally different rite, and then the Roman Rite was put, you had to do it. I don't know that there are any grumblings about particular reforms to do to the mass. I mean, I don't know. Anything can happen. There could be. I'd say it's more likely that there are other translations that come up. I know that the English translation of like the Liturgy of the Hours, because they changed the mass in 2011, and so now we're in 2025. But they also had to do the rite of baptism, rite of matrimony, the rite of ordaining a priest, ordaining a bishop. I think they had like blessing of widows was one of the ones that came out like last year, and then I think they just approved the Liturgy of the Hours. So there's gonna. I think the Glory Be might be going back. I don't know if you pray it regularly, but it says instead of
Glory be to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, never shall be, world
well,
without end. Amen. That's
it
how
says
I was
will,
raised.
and it says will be forever in the Liturgy of the Hours. But they're going. My understanding is that's going to be one of the big changes. Is they're going back to the world without end, and glory be instead of just glory to, and I don't know. People are all excited about that. I only speak one language, so I don't know if one translation is better than the other. Like I have all these friends. I actually have friends who are Latinists, and so like if a traditionalist says, "Oh, this was not translated right," and blah blah blah, I go to my Latinist friends because I don't know. Like people are like, I mean, they talk about Bible translations, and they're like, the New American Bible is a terrible translation, and the New Revised Standard Version, and the Revised. I'll take your word for it. I don't speak Greek or Hebrew, so I have to ask my smart friends which one's the better I mean, I like certain ones are more readable than others, but yeah.
Mike, I had she's passed now, a great aunt that was Mother Superior of Spalding College.
Oh, wow.
And when I was a child, she would always teach me to pray the glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, never shall be, world without end. Amen. And when I was in Catholic schools in grade school, we were told that we had to hold our hands like this, and it had to be pressed up against our heart.
Oh.
And the reason is because the heart and the brain, when they're connecting and you pray deeply, it connects you to God.
Oh, wow.
And that sensation of pressing into your heart like this with this way of holding your hands was the right way to pray, to connect to God. That's what I was always taught. And then someone told me, well, that's New Age. They didn't have New Age in the 60s.
A lot of things that the Catholic Church did in the olden days might have sounded New Age, or I don't know.
It's just weird.
All
right, we got another one.
Go ahead.
We have 169 comments. We're not going to get through them all, Mike.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. A Happy Pilgrim says, Matt Fred just got on with Daily Wire. Yeah, he did. He's coming into the Daily Wire fold. Does Mike have any opinion on how it seems the more mainstream online media outlets or Catholic voices all seem to come from the same Latin Mass pool?
I mean, I think that there's definitely an organized movement.
I've said that before.
I mean, it's one of those things. I think the more political you are, the more, favors and funding you're going to be able to get. I mean, I remember when you worked for Church Militant, you said that during 2020, I guess, was a big year because the website became uber political.
Mhm.
I mean, on our website, we've made a strong point of not getting being, I guess you could say, we're nonpartisan. Um, not I've never told anyone who to vote for, or these are the issues. This is what the church teaches. There, use your conscience and, I guess, discern according to Catholic social teaching and Catholic values. And it's funny because, and personally, I, as I've told you before, I had to step away from politics because it was around after the 2012 election. I think it had just made me so stressed out and so crazy. I think it was, and I was the type of person who would look at the daily tracking polls every day and listen to, I had my talk radio in the morning and my talk radio on the drive home, and, my favorite political websites. And I was like, how is this helping me? Like, I think this is just not, and so I was like, and I was working at the USCCB, and it was that I was going to daily mass and regular adoration and confession. And I was thinking to myself, I just want to focus on my faith. This was the time when I was going through that conversion process. Unfortunately, personalities being what they are, I wound up to a large extent replacing secular politics with church politics.
Yeah.
We gravitate towards certain things, hopefully in moderation. Hopefully it's not controlling my life, but and hopefully I'm learning some useful things along the way, reading all these documents. But
Okay, a happy
yeah.
pilgrim says, does Mike have any advice on how to approach Catholics who position themselves against the Pope and say, I follow Cardinal so-and-so, and point to the Arian crisis as proof they can side with rebels?
Well, the thing is, most people, the argument is almost irrelevant. I think people do what they want to do. Something I've thought about a lot. If somebody's decided, somebody's decided that the world is going to end in 2026 because of some prophecy, for example.
Yeah, well, there's enough of that going around.
I know. Well, we just published an article about end time, so that's what's on my head. If they are a smart, logical person, like, it has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with the soundness of the argument. If you are a smart person, you're going to use your intelligence to build up an argument that gets you to the point where you want to go. So this person who's saying, I follow Cardinal whoever, let's say Archbishop Vigano or Bishop Strickland, I follow him. I don't follow the Pope. They are going, no matter what you say, they are going to hold to that until they are ready to, until something cracks in their belief. And this is something that, I've thought about and prayed about, because sometimes it's, I've had people write to me 2 years after, like, I won't even really remember them because they were one of a million faceless trolls, and something will have happened and they'll write to me, and their whole outlook has changed, and they'll apologize, or they'll, there are a couple of contributors to Where Peter Is who were in that spot in the past. Now it's a question of, if this is an online exchange, there is some value in putting the counter argument out there, not necessarily for the person that you're arguing with, but the person who might come across what they said, and be curious about the other side of the story, and then they might see that. When it comes to encounters with people in my life, people that I know one-on-one, the prayer that I make is, to the Holy Spirit, that I play the role in that person's life, in that person's journey of faith that I'm being called to play. And so it's a question of, you just pray that, or I pray that I hopefully plant a seed. Maybe I learn something from that person, or learn to appreciate that person better. I think building a relationship when it's someone that's actually in your life. I mean, obviously, if you were here earlier in the show, you saw the situation with my mom. On this side of heaven, there wasn't any convincing, or there was no point in the arguing. But I think when people get to know you as a person, that can make a big difference. Online people that are anonymous, that's a whole different thing. But when it comes to people in your life and relationships, conversion and coming closer to Christ, it's not up to you. It's up to God. It's up to them. Yeah.
Let's go back to Happy Pilgrim for a second, Nicole, because I want to jump in on this. So Happy Pilgrim, if it's someone in your family, I'm going to put on my sales coach hat here for a second, Mike. Communication skills are important when you're speaking to people about controversial issues. So you listen first, then you repeat back to them. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, then repeat back to them what they said. And then instead of arguing with them or pushing back, ask a question like, have you ever thought of this? And then pose a question. Now, I have a son that's very strong-willed, very strong opinions. And I do this with him a lot. Instead of arguing with him, I just say, let me make sure I understand you. And I repeat it back. And then I ask a question. Have you ever thought of it this way? And invariably, they come back and they'll go, I hadn't thought of it that way. So try that, a Happy Pilgrim, if this happens to be somebody in your family. Okay. Now, Nicole, Matthew. Okay. Matthew's another longtime supporter. Mike, I was wondering if you or your website support Father James Martin. If so, why? I ask as this very upsetting for me as a Courage member.
So this is a complicated answer. At first, when we first started the website, the answer would have been a flat out, absolutely not. But because our website is dedicated to supporting the Pope, we started to notice that Pope Francis was giving attention to Father James Martin. And so then some of the writers started to try to understand why. It's interesting that he has become the center of the controversy.
And you're talking about the gay controversy.
Yeah, the gay controversy. Whenever somebody says, if I say, Father James Altman, is blah, 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 the comeback is, what about Father James Martin?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One thing that has to be said for Father Martin is he has never come out and said, I think it's okay gay marriage is okay. He's never said that. He's never said that relations between two men or two women are morally illicit.
But wouldn't you agree he's kind of straddled the line there?
So here's the thing, but this is where the but comes. And he's also said that he does not challenge church teaching, and he will never challenge church teaching. Now, he does do certain things. He might share something that's written by somebody else, that leans a certain way. Like, oh, this theologian wrote an article with this title. He doesn't say, I endorse this article. He doesn't say, but he's sharing it for everyone to read.
So
He
it's
all,
implying that he supports it.
well, that, yeah, or people very easily get that.
Yeah.
I I'll tell you this. I have talked to him quite a few times, and I've actually asked him. And when I did the podcast with Jeannie Gaffigan, we actually had him on and asked him about church teaching. And he said, I want to follow the magisterium. I don't want to change church teaching. I believe in church teaching. Now, when it comes to a lot of the LGBT community, even hinting sometimes that you don't approve of their relationship or of the morality, that can set them off and turn them away forever. So his, I guess for lack of a better term, his approach, his strategy is not even to go there. Do I endorse everything he does? No. Do I think that making him the villain of the entire Catholic Church, do I think that's appropriate? I can't see how he is, because there are some nuns and some priests and some theologians that openly advocate for gay marriage
And abortion.
and abortion and contraception, and he's not advocating for any of these things, and yet he's the bad guy. And just like people have said to like people said to Christine, to warn them about me being a Marxist or modernist or whatever, like, it's those people that get into those really uncomfortable spaces. Now, this isn't like I can't read his mind. Maybe he does obey his superiors. I guess that's, at the very least at that. And
Who is his superior? I don't
well, I mean, he's a Jesuit in New York City, so he lives in the Jesuit community in, near America Magazine.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Yeah, and so I guess he's under Cardinal Dolan. He's a priest
He's
of
under
good standing.
Cardinal Dolan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whenever he delivered, well, but he has they have a superior, whatever. Yeah. But everything he writes and every talk he gives, he submits to his superiors for approval. It's one of those things where it's like I wouldn't say like I'm the world's biggest fan, but I can respect where he's coming from, that at least he's willing to play by the rules. And he does have, good relationships with a lot of conservative people. So, I know his name is radioactive. And so it's tough for me to answer this question, but it's one of those things where I see that there's more to him than just being a boogeyman whose name is thrown out there as a bad guy. As somebody who, I mean, Lord knows I'm not perfect, but people throw my name out there like I'm the devil. And,
yeah.
And
I do, Mike.
and I can't do anything right. One of those things where it's like, if I was to admit to, like, I've admitted to faults online, like, recent example was I said something general, which I think is true. I think it's completely true. There's a reactionary side to me. Like, I admit it. It's in me. I try to not to let it come out, but sometimes when something happens in the church, I said, I think a lot of Catholics have an impulse to want to see like a purge. Like, can't they just excommunicate all, these people? Left, right, center, whoever you are, if there are some people who just, want to see this happen. And so I used the word purge. I said, but I don't think, but this isn't the way the church usually operates. And so, I'm probably wrong, or this isn't the right approach. Like, that was my quote. And people screenshot that and said, Mike Lewis wants to purge faithful Catholics. And I was, I'm like, they took it totally out of context, but I was responding to someone saying, why don't they just excommunicate all these people? And, mine was like, on my weaker days, after they started spreading that thing about the purge around, for example, that's when I wanted a purge. But on my better days, when I'm trying to think with the church and be more Christ-like and have more patience, I mean, there's got to be a reason, for example, that the SSPX is still, why they say they're in an irregular situation, why they say they aren't recognized as a true ministry in the church, but they're not excommunicated. They haven't gotten a full condemnation, and and I mean, best I can tell, it's because the church wants to hold on to them, because once they're gone, once the Lutherans broke off, once the old Catholics broke off, once different heresies broke off, even the Eastern Orthodox, but that was a complicated situation. Those things are always almost impossible to heal. So and that's the thing. So whether someone's on the, and that's, Pope Francis changed the approach to homosexual people in the sense that even though you aren't following Catholic morality, God still loves you. God still wants you here. God wants you to be a part of the church. And even if today all you can do is maybe come to Mass and sit in the back, you aren't ready for that confession yet, you aren't ready for that, you don't even know if you want it, everyone is welcome. Let's bring you in, let's meet you where you are, and let's go from there. Now, if you said
church is full of sinners, let's face it. Doesn't matter what your sexual preference is, we're all a church of sinners.
Yeah.
Mike, Paul is asking, I wonder if the church has enough people in positions to start the discipline processing.
I don't think the church has the nerve to do that. The discipline that I'm talking about, or whether they should. I mean, you look at Pope Francis, and it's funny because people called him a dictator. They said he was an authoritarian, and it's like you look around, and how many people lost their positions? Like 5 in his entire papacy. Over issues like that. Certain people that he didn't get along with, Cardinal Sarah or Cardinal Mueller, he kept them in their positions until their term was up. And then he replaced them because they were, granted, but other people would have wanted them kicked out on day one. The church works very slowly. There's a cardinal I know who this is like big time. Every time I talk to him, I'd slip in, when are you going to fire Strickland into the conversation? He did not indulge it ever. So even if you knew the name of the cardinal, don't even, they're much better at discretion than I am.
All right. A happy Catholic says, unfortunately, I think they are going to go after Pope Leo in a more ugly, damaging way than heretic. And Mike, this bothers me a lot that they are going after Pope Leo worse than they did Pope Francis. And I honestly don't understand it. I think Pope Leo is full of love and joy. I just love him. I really do. I just love that man. And it bothers me to the point where I don't even go on social media much because I don't want to see what they're saying about him.
I think Pope Leo, so he's been Pope for 6 months.
Yeah, only 6 months.
It took people 3 or 4 years to turn on Pope Francis.
Yeah.
Pope Leo, I was trying to time out, like, when did it start? I thought it was the most boring papacy in the world.
Mike, it started the minute his name was announced. John Henry Weston was on the phone recording that this is a nightmare.
Well, and so did Taylor Marshall. But then the next day, the marching orders came down, zip it. And so it felt like all the traditionalists were pretending to like him. Although some of them maybe did. I don't know. But it was like he'd wear something red, and all of a sudden everyone would act like it was the second coming of, Pius IX. And although he was big on papal authorities, so maybe they wouldn't have liked him. But yeah, it was. I mean, it was really, it was this discord where it was like you knew it wasn't genuine, and there were people like Weston, people like Strickland, even, who you could tell they would say, you know, Pope Leo seems very nice, but I'm a little troubled by this. But let me tell you what happened. September 1st of this year, he met with Father James Martin. And ever since then, he's become more and more vocal about things like social justice, about the death penalty, about synodality. They just had the Nostra Aetate Jubilee.
Yeah,
With,
we covered that. Hmm.
and and people have just gone. They've It's like they're already turning on him. One podcaster called him an apostate, and
Hmm.
so did Father Altman. But Father Altman doesn't even think he's Pope. And it's like you've got this weird world right now where it's half of them seem to be like, let's fake it until he gives us our Latin Mass back, and then there's the other half is like, you guys are cowards. We need to stand up to this error. They call it a purity spiral. Sort of, they try to outdo each other.
Hmm.
I mean, you see it in the pro-life movement all the time, where it would be like, no, we aren't going to accept this compromise. We've got to go for all. And then there's the more pragmatic side that's like, no, let's follow the strategy so we can ultimately get what we want. But it seems like traditionalism is kind of in that mess right now. But completely missing from that is the primacy of the successor of Peter in the church. So
Vix Tex, who's a longtime viewer, good to see you, Vix Tex. Social media can be a pit of vipers. Absolutely.
absolutely.
Hmm. Um, Mike says, Mike Pinkowski, we have had a massive discipline issue since the 70s. Purges and excommunications should have happened years ago. Lando Lake's statement, 1968, USCCB should sue all Catholic universities for direct ownership. Whoa. What do you think about that, Mike?
I mean, we already kind of discussed that. I guess this is his, this is Mike's response. I mean, that impulse is there, but once again, it's like there's the apologetics media wing of the church, the commentary wing of the church, and then there's the institutional church. And the institutional church simply does not work like that. I mean, I don't know what to say. I think that, all of us, for us, especially Americans, we're very politically minded. So we want to vote that guy out. We want to impeach that guy. We want to undermine that guy. It's not they say the church works in centuries. And
Yeah.
so with a lot of things, it's like, when is this bishop going to turn 75? And then you think, wouldn't it be great if they replaced him with this guy? And instead they replace him with a more boring guy you never heard of. It's just the church. Somehow we've been around for 2,000 years. And a lot of that is because we plod along. I think in this internet age, I think more action needs to happen. But
Yeah, Father Bill Fox 2961 says, which is why I think allowing Cardinal Burke to offer the TLM in St. Peter's was a huge mistake.
I mean, I'm not gonna, it's one of the policies of where Peter is. I don't know. I think what Pope Leo is trying to do is build up some relations. I think he and Cardinal Burke obviously are getting off on a better foot than Burke did with Pope Francis. So I mean, it was a conciliatory gesture.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's like, it would be nice if the world of Summorum Pontificum actually existed. Like, that's the thing with Pope Benedict. He said, we want to preserve these traditions, and I think that's a good thing. In at least to have it as a, on special occasions or something. Some Orthodox churches will have two different rites that they'll celebrate at different times of the year. But the problem with the TLM is that, yeah, it's there's this ideological thing. It's this rejection of the new mass. I don't know that anybody who goes to the new mass rejects the old mass. I mean, they might
No,
not
I
like it.
know.
I mean, people see it as valid. They see it as part of, Catholic history and patrimony and all those kinds of things. And I mean, there's certain aesthetic things that people don't like. Like some people don't like Latin or chant or ad orientem. I mean, it's funny because I always liked the idea of ad orientem because of the symbolism, and I had read about it. And then when I finally saw it, I was like, well, now I can't see or hear anything. So it's, and I mean, going to daily mass in a small chapel, and being able to see the altar, facing the people, it's like I would unite my prayers with the Eucharistic prayer and
Yeah.
see and hear what was happening as it was happening. Whereas and I mean, if you prefer ad orientem in the old rite, but it's like I can understand why I mean, it's people say it wasn't in Vatican, it wasn't listed in Sacrosanctum Concilium. It was well, there's a reason why 99% of Catholics just accepted it, because I think it really did foster active participation, even if the symbolism might be more profound facing east. I think that there are advantages for devotion and prayer if done properly. But yeah, so I mean, the thing is, it's like a concession here and there shouldn't be a big problem. Unfortunately, it's being exploited for propaganda, and
Well,
and so that's where I think Father
okay.
might be right. Yeah.
Nicole, this is our last question, because we have held Mike over 2 hours. You have been very generous with your
Oh,
time,
thank
Mike. I
you.
really appreciate it. Okay, there are valid concerns on the health of the church, but I fear trads have a rebellious spirit that is not healthy, and the liberal side does not want to damage the
Does
church.
want to, I think.
Or does want to damage the church. Yeah. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. And the liberal side does want to damage the church.
So yes,
Okay.
criticizing both sides, which
Mhm.
I think that's valid. I think it's funny because I think the weird thing is, having come from the conservative Catholic background and sort of being kicked out of the conservative Catholic club when Francis became Pope, I had a lot of, and I'm working in the USCCB building, so it's a lot of they're progressive Catholics maybe, but they're committed to the church. They're religious. I don't know how orthodox all of them are or whatever, but when I'd start to explain and defend Pope Francis, or say the types of things that are going on, because they would notice these attacks on Pope Francis, the more liberal ones, and they'd come up to me and they'd ask me what was going on. And I'd be talking to them about the magisterium and development and continuity and papal primacy, and how all of these things, conversations that they never would you never would have had with a conservative pope, and with all the conservatives trying to lay down the law. And it's like, no, this needs to be done in an ecclesial way. I have friends who were who became involved in like the synod, who very strongly want like women deacons, for example, like ordained women deacons. And they started to learn that it's like, wait a minute, the whole church needs to walk together. Like, we can't just, like, let's start having that conversation.
Mhm.
um so I think I think that's what synodality is supposed to do, is supposed to, I mean, one of the things people talk about women priests, which I believe that women can never be ordained. I believe what John Paul
Yeah, I do
II said.
too. Yeah.
Now,
We can't have, personally, I believe, Mike, you can't have women deacon or priest.
yeah, I
Now
mean,
there is
yeah,
a role for women in the church, and one of the commenters informed me that because I think that I'm a feminist. I have no idea
yeah.
where that came from, but
Well, and I mean, it's on the table technically. Like, I
yeah.
think it's probably going to go a certain way, but it's one of those things where the church has said we can talk about this. So if people do want the women to be ordained to the diaconate, that the forum is still currently ongoing, and whenever the decision comes out, I'll accept whatever the church decides. I have feelings about what the church probably will decide, but here's the thing: even on an issue like contraception, or an issue like women priest, I am not afraid if it's done within the context of the church, we are Catholics, we are coming together, we recognize that in the end, the magisterium makes the decision. Let's argue about women priests. Not argue, but let's have a dialogue. Because you know what? Maybe people don't find the church's explanations convincing. So if we have that fruitful conversation and we trust in Christ's promises to the church, we can only grow as a church from that conversation. I mean, that's a controversial thing to say, but I think, there are reasons why we have arguments against old heresies. Like the Trinity came out of people denying Christ's divinity. Our doctrine, so something beautiful can come out of dialoguing and engaging people who disagree with the church's teaching. The problem is a lot of traditionalists they get angry that the conversation is even being had.
Well, and that was Nicole's point on Monday.
Yeah.
Monday night when we were talking about the Jubilee Synod, and her point was that they're against dialogue, right? They're against dialogue, but yet they're not against all the criticism they throw at the Pope and all the criticism they throw at the Catholic Church.
Yeah. And they don't see it that way. They see themselves as they're defending Catholicism in their mind. And I guess that's the thing that my article is trying to dissuade them of. This is what the church thinks. Like, whether you like it or not, this is why the church disagrees, or these are the things that the church disagrees with you on concretely. This isn't really a debate. This is just sort of, for your information, here's your opposition research. These are the things that are leading to this. And for some reason, people are resistant to that conversation.
Well, Mike, we put up your website all throughout the podcast so people will know how to reach you. Now, is there any other way that they can reach you on social media, to follow you on social media?
So I'm mostly on X, but I guess I'm also on Blue Sky and Facebook. So we have Facebook pages and X for where Peter is. And my handle on almost everything is MFJ Lewis. So all one word.
And what does that stand for?
Michael Francis James Lewis. So it's at MFJ Lewis, and so.
All right, everyone, that's where you can follow. And you know how we always end, and that is eternal life is forever. Got a plan? Mike, what should their plan be?
Jesus. Wait,
absolutely.
Is that the right one?
Jesus. Thank you so much, you all, for staying on for almost 2.5 hours. Thank you, Mike, for all the time you gave us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Stick through the end. I'd like to talk to you on the back end. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone. We'll see you on Monday, where we're going to talk about, and I'm going to mess it up, scrupulosity. Did I say that right, Mike?
Yes.
Scrupulosity. All right. Until then, God bless you all. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.